me which one's cervical, which one's thoracic, and which one's lumbar when I set them like this, because I have small, medium, and large. Can you all see that? It's when they are just sitting out by themselves and you don't know what kind of bone that I just put, because they're not all, I got some pretty good distinct ones here. So I'm going to teach you how to figure out the difference between a cervical, a thoracic, and a lumbar if they weren't sitting nice and in order for you and just randomly they were just sitting there and you were walking up on it on a practical and I say name the vertebra. Okay, does that make sense? So I'm going to pick the two that kind of look most similar. Hopefully you realize this one kind of looks really weird. So I'm going to pull that one to the side because that's that really big one. Could you say that those two look pretty similar to one another? Pretty similar. This one is smaller. Students will say that. Well, that's real obvious when they're sitting side by side. It's not so obvious when they're just random. So I'm going to turn it over for you can see something. Do you notice something really different about these? How many holes are in this one right here? One. How many holes are in this one right here? Three. Cervical have 3 holes. Write yourself a note. Cervicals have 3 holes. Cervicals are up in your neck area, and they need to send extra nerves and blood vessels to that thing called the brain. And you guys that are in class, if you'll look on the model, I'm not going to swing it around again, but you can see the orange thing coming out. It's going through those little holes there. So you can see the little orange thing. That's the nerve coming out up there. Okay, so cervical always have 3 holes, always. So we'll go back to this one in a minute. So we're going to concentrate on cervical, and we're going to start with your top 2. Your top 2 are the most important because it allows you to say yes and no. It allows the head rotation. So this is not one of the top 2. This is the cervical, but this is not 1 or 2. So number 1 actually looks like that. Can you still see the 3 holes? 1, 2, big one, 3. So there's 2 small ones and a big one. So this is called C1, but more importantly than C1, because C1 is not what I'm wanting, this is actually called the atlas. It's named after the Greek god. I think Greek. I don't really know goddesses and stuff, so we'll go Greek. Could be Roman god. I don't know. I don't know the difference between any of that. Okay. My son would shun me because he's a literature person. Okay. But it's supposed to be holding up the world, right? That's what it's supposed to be. So this is called Atlas after this because the world that it's going to hold up is your head. And so do you see this little thing right here that looks like a platform on this? This is connecting to these 2 things on the occipital. Do you remember those occipital condyles? These 2 things sit right there. And it allows you to go, yes. You guys in the, I'll do it here because I can't really do it there. Allows you to go to yes. So that condyle sits on that little platform on this C1. Does that make sense? That's why these are called condyles. When you wonder, like, why are those flappy things called condyles? Because they're connecting to your C1 vertebra. And it allows you to go yes. Okay? So this is the atlas. This is not a really good one of it's plastic. This is the axis. It looks like it's got a thumb sticking up. It looks like a thumb sticking up. And what this does, this sits right there like this. I have this one's better. Can you see that? This sits on it like this. And it allows you to turn your head like this and go, no. It allows rotation. So this is the atlas, the axis. Atlas, axis, C1, C2. C1, C2. I don't want just C1, C2. One way you can remember it, this is supposed to be the Greek god, going like that. and you rotate on an axis, so the one you rotate on, which is at C2. Other students say, I just remember it's alphabetical order. ATAX. Some people can't put things in alphabetical order, so if that's you, then don't do that. Atlas axis. Okay, that's your top 2 vertebrae. We'll label in a second. Oh, I want to say one more thing. The thumb-looking part, that. It actually has a name. You get to choose which one you want. You can either call it the odontoid process, or it's called DENS, D-E-N-S. Which one do I think you'll probably pick? DENS. It's easier to spell. It's easier to say. I'll write it on that little sheet in just a minute for you guys. Okay. All right. Now we're going to talk about some of those features that are going on with this thing. We'll show them and then we'll label them. I'm going to watch the time. All right. So do you remember what I said making up your spine is the spinous process? Do you remember that? This thing that's poking is making up your spine. So this pokey thing is the spinous process. We'll label those together in just a moment. So if you'll just kind of watch with me. So this is the spinous process. And the things that come straight across here, these are the transverse processes. This is what's poking out to the side. So this is your back. I'm looking at posterior view. So if I had to go this way, this is be poking out. So this is the transverse process. So this thing that I'm holding on to, in fact, on all these guys, do you see this that I'm holding on to? This that I'm holding on to, that's known as the body. Okay, that is the body. So hopefully you can see that the lumbar has a lot bigger body because the lumbar has to support more weight. So it's going to have a bigger body. So that's the body, that's the body, that's the body. Because they're all called body, this would be the body of a cervical, this would be the body of a thoracic, this would be the body of a lumbar vertebra. Does that make sense? That's the body. Now, what did I call this? Good. That's the transverse process. So if I turn over, these little holes are actually in the transverse process. And hole means we've got some nerves going through it, foramen. So these are the transverse foramen because they're holes that are in the transverse process. Make sense? Okay. Then you got a big hole in the middle. Guess what runs through this hole?
Spinal cord.
Spinal cord, your spinal cord. So this hole in the middle is called the vertebral foramen, not the intervertebral foramen, because that's in between 2 vertebrae. This is just stuck in the middle of the 1 vertebra. That is the vertebral foramen. We're going to label here in just a second. All right, one more thing we're going to do on this one. This little nose thing, to me it looks like a nose. This is the spinous process. This right here was the transverse process. This little area right in between is called the lamina. And we'll talk about probably next time why that's important. Sometimes you'll get a bulging disc or problems and they'll cut right there in that bone to alleviate pressure. Okay, so this is the lamina. So let's label that guy. So this one that I put on top is your C1, but C1 is not what I want. That is C1, though. That's how C1 looks. I want the real name, and it is the Atlas. Very good. This is your C2, but I don't want C2. I want, this is your axis. And then a little thumb sticking up that looks like a thumb that thing rotates on. It's called the DENS, which is probably what most of you are going to choose, which is fine by me. You do not get bonus points for knowing that it's the odontoid process. Either one, both are correct. These are all cervical. They all have the 3 holes. So then we move over here. This right here that's sticking up that makes up your spine is the spinous process. The thing sticking out to both sides there is the transverse process. I'm ahead of myself. These little holes that are in the transverse process are called transverse foramens. See why we learned what foramen was? The larger hole where your spinal cord is the vertebral, not intervertebral because that's in between two vertebrae. This is in a vertebra itself. Foramen. And then this little area here between that and that, this little part there is known as the lamina. Okay, let's go back to this. So how are you going to be able to tell it's cervical? Real obvious, it's
3 holes.
3 holes. 1, 2, 3 holes, that's cervical. And then we might name something on it. Okay, so then we've got this one, and of course sitting side by side, that you definitely can tell that the lumbar has a bigger body to it. But for some reason, when I first started teaching, when I looked at these things, this looked like a giraffe to me.
It does.
And that's just what I saw. I was like, I just see a giraffe. And the cool thing is, I was Googling like just cool pictures, and someone else thought it was a giraffe, and they did it, and I put it on my PowerPoint. I stole it. They like, it looked like a giraffe to them too. I'm like, oh, I'm glad I'm not the only one. So the one that looks like a giraffe is thoracic. Okay. This one to me looked like a moose. I said, here's the PowerPoint that someone else that I stole. I was like, oh, now do you see it? That's it. So they put them side by side. I'm like, yep, that's what I've been seeing this whole time. Let me show you the moose real quick, and then we'll go over these parts next time. But there's the moose. But especially when it's turned like that.